Today on Path of Grace.
It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm then, and do not let yourselves be burdened again by a yoke of slavery. Did you hear that? Why did Christ set us free? For freedom. It is for freedom, for liberty that Christ has set us free. So stand firm. Don't let yourselves be burdened again by a yoke of slavery. The New Revised Standard Version. For freedom, Christ has set us free. Stand firm, therefore, and do not submit again to a yoke of slavery. Young's literal translation. In the freedom, then, with which Christ did make you free, stand ye, and be not held fast again by a yoke of servitude. Wow, we're to relate to God not as servants or slaves, but as cherished children. I heard a great old story that I want to share with you as we get started today. I'm not sure if it's true, but yet it is a great story about Abraham Lincoln. And the story goes something like this. Abe Lincoln went to a slave market, and while he was there at this slave market, he noticed a beautiful young African-American woman being auctioned off to the highest bidder. He bid on her and won. Think about it. Abe Lincoln bid on this woman. He purchased her on the auction block. And he could see the anger in this young woman's eyes and could imagine what she must be thinking. Here's another white man who's going to buy me, use me, and then discard me. And as Lincoln walked off with his property, he turned to the woman and said, I have paid for you. Now you are free. What does that mean? She asked. Well, said Lincoln, it means that you're free. Does that mean I can say whatever I want to say? Yes, replied Lincoln. It means you can say whatever you want to say. Does it mean that I can be whatever I want to be? Yes, you can be whatever you want to be. Does that mean I can go wherever I want to go? Asked the woman. Yes, it means that you are free. You can go wherever you want to go. Suddenly, this young woman began to cry as she understood what Abe Lincoln was giving her. And listen to what she said, according to the story. Then I think I will go with you. Do you understand that this is what God has done for us through Christ? We have been redeemed. We have been purchased with a price. It was a price greater than silver or gold. We were bought with the blood of the only begotten Son of God. We now have a new master, one who, once he paid the price, set us free. You remember what we saw in an earlier study in Paul's letter to the Galatians? Paul told us that Christ has redeemed us. He has purchased us from the curse of the law. He set us free from the curse of the law. What law was that specifically? Well, in the context of Paul's letter, he was talking about the curse of the law of Moses, something which he calls a ministry of death and condemnation. Christ has redeemed us from the law. He has redeemed us from attempting to approach God and relate to God based upon our own performance or a set of religious rules. He has taken that yoke of bondage off of our backs and set us free to simply enter into a relationship with God, to know that we are accepted by God, to rejoice in that relationship with God, and to rest in it and to enjoy the freedom that we have. And Paul, in his writings, warns us time and again that there will be those who, with the best of religious intentions, will try to steal that freedom away from us as they attempt to lay religious burdens squarely back on our shoulders, which is what had happened to the Galatians whom he was writing to. Now, if you missed any of our previous studies in Galatians, when we wrap up today, please do me a favor. Give those earlier studies a careful listen from beginning to end, because this is incredibly important stuff. Right now, though, let's take a look at the very first verse of Galatians chapter 5. He says this, stand fast. In other words, stand your ground. Stand fast, therefore. The word therefore connects with everything that came before this in this letter. Stand fast, therefore, in the liberty by which Christ has made us free, and do not be entangled again with a yoke of bondage. Stand fast in this liberty. that Christ freed you for, and do not be entangled again with that yoke of religious bondage. The bondage was the religion that had been placed upon them by these well-meaning folks. Let me read this same verse from some other translations. They aren't necessarily all great translations, but in this verse, they make the point pretty well. In the NIV, the nearly inspired version, I jokingly call it, it says, "It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm then, and do not let yourselves be burdened again by a yoke of slavery." Did you hear that? Why did Christ set us free? For freedom. It is for freedom, for liberty that Christ has set us free. So stand firm. Don't let yourselves be burdened again by a yoke of slavery. The New Revised Standard Version. "For freedom, Christ has set us free. Stand firm, therefore, and do not submit again to a yoke of slavery." Young's literal translation. "In the freedom, then, with which Christ did make you free, stand ye, and be not held fast again by a yoke of servitude." Wow, we're to relate to God not as servants or slaves, but as cherished children. Here's Darby's translation. "Christ has set us free in freedom. Stand fast, therefore, and be not held again in a yoke of bondage." Now, Paul wrote these words to the Christians in Galatia at a time when, unfortunately, these believers were beginning to turn away from a simple relationship with God based upon what Christ has done, simple faith in Christ, to begin to trust in themselves and their religious activities. Rather than resting in the finished work on the cross of Calvary, they were beginning to turn away from that and put religious rules and regulations on themselves and regulate their standing with God based upon themselves. They had turned away from the good news, the gospel, which is incredibly simple. And people started to add to it and tried to lay the law of Moses on these folks' shoulders, and it began to pollute and corrupt the simple message. And what was being presented as good news, as we saw earlier in Galatians, was not good news at all. They were presenting it as a gospel, but it was no gospel at all. And again, these weren't the only people that struggled with this. It's happened throughout church history. When Paul wrote his second letter to the Corinthians in chapter 11, verse 3, he said, "I fear lest somehow as a serpent deceived Eve by his craftiness, so your minds may be corrupted from the simplicity that is in Christ." Now, I know I just read verse 1 of chapter 5 from several translations, but you know what? I want to read this verse from 2 Corinthians chapter 11 from a few other translations as well. The New American Standard Bible. Listen to this. This is 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 3. Paul says, "I am afraid, lest as the serpent deceived Eve by his craftiness, your minds should be led astray from the simplicity and purity of devotion to Christ." Young's literal translation. "I fear, lest, as the serpent did beguile Eve in his subtlety, so your minds may be corrupted from the simplicity that is in the Christ." Paul's fear was that the adversary would somehow dupe these believers, that he would mess with their minds and corrupt this incredibly simple thing that we call the gospel of grace, the gospel given by Christ to Paul to share with you and me. And Paul was afraid that their minds would be corrupted, that the gospel would mutate into something that was no longer simple and freeing, but something burdensome and religious, just like the world offers in all of its religious packages. And I wonder, if Paul were to somehow be able to travel through time and take a look at what is called the church today, if he would express the same concern. I wonder if he would say, "I fear, lest somehow as a serpent deceived Eve by his craftiness, so your minds may be corrupted from the simplicity that is in Christ." Or I wonder if he would even go further than that. I wonder if he would say, "Hey guys, my fears, those ones I wrote about to the Corinthians, they have come to pass. Your minds have been corrupted from the simplicity that is in Christ. You have become completely religified, and what you're calling the gospel doesn't even resemble what Christ gave me." Now, when we get together next time, we're going to journey further into Galatians chapter 5 with a bit longer and a bit more in-depth study. Have to cut it a little bit short today, but I've sure enjoyed our time together, and I hope you have as well. My name is James Flanders. As always, thank you so much for listening. Thank you for your prayers, your encouragement, and your support. My family truly appreciates all of those things. Be blessed, my friend. Be blessed.